Welcome to the Generous Business Owner Podcast, where business owners gain inspiration and encouragement to live a legacy, not just leave one. And now your hosts, Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. My name is Jeff Thomas, and we've got, as usual, my sidekick, Jeff Rutt, with us today. Say hello to the people, Jeff.
Hello to the people.
And we have a very special guest, Lonnie Gienger. He is a partner and CEO of a real estate firm named Wilkinson, but he's also super passionate about sort of businesses, ministry, and families thriving over generations and this sort of thing. So it's going to be a wide-ranging conversation today. Lonnie, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Jeff. And Jeff, I've followed you both mostly from afar for years and admired what you've been doing. So excited to be able to connect with you and hopefully learn some more from you too.
Well, thanks so much. Jeff, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, Lonnie, such a special opportunity here to have you on the podcast. Tell us about the early years in the household, faith formation, maybe any entrepreneurial experience, or walk us through some of those early development years.
Sure. Yeah, I grew up as a pastor's kid, and so did my wife. Also, before both of our parents were pastors, they were entrepreneurs. So it was a bit of a blend of an entrepreneurial spirit in a pastor's home. So obviously valued both of those growing up. And really came to believe from a young age that the church was the best way, if not the only way, to build a better world for God. So went down that path, took theology, became a pastor. After just a few years in the pastor seat, both my wife and I realized our real passion was to connect with people who wouldn't normally walk through the doors of a church. Challenge was we didn't really know anybody who didn't go to church because we were so raised in the church environment. And that essentially forced me to this path of getting out into the real world to figure out how to connect with people who wouldn't normally go to church. And I've quickly discovered you can't get a very good job when your education is in theology outside of church and ministry things. So I was essentially forced to start a business and learn a lot from the School of Hard Knocks. I'm still permanently unemployable. I've been an entrepreneur now for over 40 years and have come to love that journey. I will say, though, that for a lot of years, once I started down that path, by the way, the way it worked is we started a business, of course, had a lot of failure, a lot of struggle, lost a lot of money that we didn't have, made a little bit here and there. And over time, I fell in love with the process of building leaders and teams that really made a tangible difference following God's principles in the business world. But I had this consistent angst in my heart that I was not somehow living up to my highest calling, right? In fact, I was told that a number of times from various well-meaning people. And when I was in the church world, which we ended up, 30 years ago, also starting a nonprofit that is leadership training and coaching for pastors and church planting. So when I was in the church world, I always felt like, okay, now I'm in my sweet spot. This is where God wants me. But when I was in the business world, I felt like I was actually making more of a tangible difference. And, sometimes we'd have groups of, 20, 30 people in our home for Bible studies who never, ever went to church, but came to know us and have a relationship with us through business. And I felt like, okay, I don't know as I could do that as a pastor, right? Quite to that extent. So for years, like decades, I had this angst in my heart about those two worlds. And it wasn't until probably 10 years ago that God really prompted me to just quiet my own thoughts and sit down and pray, think, journal about what is God's real plan, his true vision for the purpose of business and building his kingdom. And over a period of some years, I did a lot of journaling, mostly on long plane rides and weekends. And what came out of that was a firm belief about business and its role in building God's kingdom and actually building the church. And happy to unpack that more if you want. And it actually turned into a book. I didn't intend to be an author. I didn't really want to be an author, but I ended up sending my journals and manuscripts to a number of 25, 30 CEOs that I know, most of whom were not Christians, and said, what do you think of this? And the feedback was so extraordinary, with people saying, well, if that's what God thinks of business, maybe I could actually follow God, right? I mean, those kinds of comments, right? So ended up publishing it as a book, and God's done some cool things with that beyond what we expected. So that's a bit on my journey in business. Happy to talk about family, but do you have any questions? You want to dive any deeper on that subject first?
Well,
Well,
we're going to come
so
back to the family, but Jeff, go ahead.
yeah, let's exactly. So I think stage one, because we know you're writing another kind of book right now about maybe it's a little more on the family side and what comes next. But for on the business side, so the book's called Beyond Business: How Your Company Can Build a Better World. What are just 2 or 3 principles out of there that have really resonated with people?
I think since a lot of the audience has a church background, what I'll say is that what resonates and sometimes surprises people the most is to really dig deep and understand what Jesus had in mind when he said, I'll build my church and the gates of hell won't prevail against it. The word that Jesus used was ecclesia. I'll build my ecclesia, and the gates of hell won't prevail against it. We have come to translate that word ecclesia into church, but it often puzzled me why, when Jesus said, I'll build my church, he didn't unpack so what does that look like? How should I build the church? If you said we're supposed to build a church, there's no instructions on how to do church planting and how to do services and all that kind of stuff from the Bible, right? Puzzled me for years. Well, I discovered a couple of things. First of all, when Jesus said that, the disciples knew exactly what the ecclesia was, and they knew exactly how it worked in society, because it was a secular institution that the Roman government used to expand the rule and reign of the Roman emperor, who is then seen as a descendant, the Son of God, right? Jesus could have said, I will build my temple or my synagogue system, because those were the 2 religious systems at the time. Instead, he said, I'll build my ecclesia system, which is a secular system that was expanded through society, primarily through the marketplace and families. Okay. All right. Now, it was a common saying at the time, where 2 or 3 are gathered together in the name of the Roman emperor, there the power and authority of the Roman emperor is with them to expand his rule and reign throughout the entire earth. Okay. So when Jesus said, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am with them, they got that. This is the Son of God, and he's expanding his ecclesia, not through a centralized system like the traditional religious system of the time, but as salt and light, right? As yeast, and really through the marketplace, through the ecclesia. That's so. When I talk to business owners now, I say, did you know that as a business owner, as a business leader, you probably can function closer to what it looked like in Jesus' mind when he said, I'll build my ecclesia, than what it looks like if you're standing in the pulpit on the weekend. What? Like, you are literally probably building the church, or you have the platform. Our businesses are powerful platforms to expand God's kingdom. They aren't it's not just doing business as ministry. This is beyond doing business as ministry. This may sound like anathema to some, but business is the ecclesia, i.e. business is what we've come to call the church. Okay, so that's a big C paradigm shift for most business owners, right? So
that's really cool.
For us, as I started to embrace that, it completely changed how I embrace and just how I view why I'm doing what I do in business, right? I'm not just making money to give to ministry. I'm not doing business as ministry. I'm doing business in a way that it is the ecclesia, that it is building God's kingdom, right?
Yeah, I think some people. I think you make a great point here, which is some people think of the ministry portion of their business as maybe a bolt-on, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe like you said, I'm running a normal business the way they taught me, whatever, how I saw it, or in business school or whatever, and then I'll just use the proceeds in a meaningful way, which is cool. or let me implement a few things here, but this is sort of it's an add-on, and I think sort of the word that comes to mind as you're telling that story and those principles is sort of an integrated look and kind of a bigger view of what business was going. It is part of the Big C Church, if you will, like that. This is an integrated key part. And I saw Mike Shiro at C12 post something just the other day about the average business owner, even small business, touches 7,000 lives, which is bigger than most mega churches. Okay, well, what's the message you're sending? So maybe keep going on that a little bit.
Well, I would say my dream to that point, Jeff, is that someday in the conventional church, when the paid pastor or volunteer pastor stands up in the pulpit, we're just as intentional about celebrating the lives that are touched through the business leaders as we are the missionaries overseas. Like when was the last time you were in church and they said, okay, all the business leaders stand up now. We calculated in this church and we figured out that you business leaders are providing 20,000 meals a day to people in this community. Right? You're providing education to hundreds of people in this community, right? Through what the business creates and taxes and revenue and all these things. I mean, if we truly embrace that, our business, it's not just a part of the Big C Church, it is the church, right? We would celebrate, honor, and of course, conventional churches would embrace and foster and support and encourage those business owners who embrace their business as their key platform to help build the church, right? I mean, it's a big shift. I mean, I learned about this firsthand when I started going to China quite a bit for business and developed some close relationships there. And of course, this was several years ago. It was even harder to actually meet in person and have what we consider church, right?
Yeah.
And I learned from friends that they had what's called boss churches. And I said, what's a boss church? Well, it's what we call a church. It's a boss who actually disciples people to Christ through everything they do in their business. And I said, well, do they they actually have Bible studies and stuff? Yes. The government doesn't do anything about that? Well, no, because they're boss churches. They're creating so much value for society. They don't want to shut those down. And their employees are happy and they're producing good value for society. Why would the government shut that down, right? It's like, okay, well, that's a different kind of church, right? And I met one boss church leader who had 4,000 people who on a regular basis met in his business or associated with his business for Bible study, prayer, fellowship, that had become Christians as a result of his business. And that all worked for his business, right? I mean, that's a different kind of church. So, those are things, I'm far in our business, we do our best to live out those values, but we're always further away from where I'd like to be and constantly striving to improve our reach of our business to really impact people for God.
Wow. Maybe we shift gears a little bit. Jeff, why don't you go ahead and put your favorite question on the table about kind of family and that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, I always, Lonnie, I love what you're doing as far as your writing, the curriculum, but especially your focus on that next gen. I really believe that we should always be looking for, what happens to our children and our children's children and their children. And if that baton doesn't get passed to that first generation, or it's diluted in some way. So talk a little bit about some of the intentionality that you've had in that area.
Yeah, I'll start by maybe reflecting on how that even became a focus in my life. And as is often the case, God teaches us things out of painful seasons, mistakes and challenges that we go through. And so rewind several years before I came to really embrace our businesses as our platform for building God's kingdom. I was still excited about business. I love business. I love my family. I just wasn't nearly as intentional at building my family as I was at building our businesses. And from the outside, we looked good, successful businesses, nice house, leaders in the church and the community. But there was a season where our marriage was an absolute train wreck. We had 3 young kids. We actually found ourselves um, talking about going to a counselor to not to fix it. We were past thinking we could even fix our marriage, just going to a counselor to figure out how to get divorced in a way that was as healthy as possible for our 3 young kids.
Wow.
And of course, as pastors' kids, we when we got married, we vowed that the conversation or thought about divorce would never even be in the realm of our thinking, right? So that tells you how much of a train wreck our personal life was. And it was during that time that I was presenting a leadership conference, and one of the breaks, this business owner came up to me and started asking me questions about his business. We had a coaching company for business owners back then. And he said, I got 1,000 employees. When I come to conferences like this, I just know my employees aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're not actually like making the best decisions possible. What do I do about that? And I asked him basic questions like I'd ask any business owner, like, hey, do you have written core values so your employees know how to make decisions when you aren't around based on your values? Do you have written mission, vision? Do you have written strategies that everybody understands and you follow up on a regular basis? And he said, oh, I don't write that stuff down. I said, my employees have been with me for a long time. They know what we stand for. And they know where we're going. And I just laughed like you did. I said, his name's Greg. I said, Greg, you're just kidding yourself. If you think you're going to develop a legacy business that works when you aren't around, it's not going to happen that way. What I didn't know at the time is this guy, Greg, he still is to this day the only successful business leader I know who's way more intentional about how he leads his family than about how he leads his business. It's just his calling, his gifting, his passion. So in that first conversation, Greg turned around and asked me, he said, Lonnie, let me ask you, do you have written core values for your family? Do you have written mission and vision do you have written strategies for your family? And I bit right into it. I said, Greg, it's my family. I mean, they know what we stand for. Going right. And Greg, in that conversation, he looked at me and said, Lonnie, that tells me you care way more about your business success and your business legacy than you care about your family and your family legacy. And of course, my ego didn't allow me to accept that. I pushed back. No, not really, Greg. I love my family. But fortunately, Greg followed up. We developed a friendship, and now for almost 3 decades, Greg and his wife Rhonda have come alongside Shelley and I. And Greg has coached me, prodded me, cajoled me to think and act as intentionally about how I lead my family as how we lead our business, and that has changed everything for us. To where now today we have 4 adult kids, 3 are married, we have 7 grandkids. And what we love most about life is doing life together as an extended family, and business together, investments together, and purpose and mission together. And we wouldn't have probably any of that, certainly not to that degree, if it wasn't for that big shift in paradigm. So now, for example, for 20 years, we've done annual family strategic planning retreats every January, right? Also, for 20 years, we've done what we call our mid-year family compass review. So we did develop, family values, mission, vision a couple decades ago. And one of the things we do, in fact, Shell and I were just talking about this morning, super excited that here in just a few weeks, we're doing our annual family compass review vacation. So it's a week vacation. We take sometimes 2 or 3 parts of 2 or 3 days or 1 full day during that fun vacation time. And I know Jeff, right, you do some things like this too, and we swapped great stories about it. Learn from Jeff too on this. It's just so powerful because we take intentional time to celebrate where we're each living out our extended family values and vision and our purpose. And now, with adult kids who are married, each of our next generations have their own family values and mission and vision, their own family compass. So we talk about theirs and celebrate what they're doing next. We talk about next steps that we can do to further enhance our life together around those things. And it's created this river of shared culture that flows from generation to generation that is the greatest treasure we have in our family these days. So And out of that, by the way, I'll just, to wrap up that part, out of that, after doing that for just focusing on family for years, probably 10 or so years ago, we started being asked to speak at family office conferences on this topic, just sharing our family story. How do you like do life and business and investments together as a family and actually get along, right?
Yeah.
And I said no several times, because it wasn't my thing. I'm not, I didn't do any of this to try and like help other families. I just wanted to save my own family, and learn what it looked like to treat my own family as my first and foremost, most important ministry, so to speak, my highest priority. But eventually, because we'd been speaking at family, we do a lot of real estate investments for a lot of years now, and so I'd been speaking at family office conferences, usually on real estate investment. Eventually, several years ago, started talking about this subject, and we just kept saying yes to God as He opened doors for that. Because the message so resonated with the audience, not because of, not because I'm a good presenter, just it's God's principle, I believe, to put family first. And I believe God's ideal for establishing disciples and expanding his kingdom is first and foremost. Now, my conviction is that first and foremost, it was through the family, right? If every family leader discipled their family well, the Great Commission would be complete, right?
Mhm.
God's kingdom would be greatly enhanced on this earth. And I
Mhm.
believe that the methodology, the vehicle that God chose. I mean, why was Jesus born not to a famous religious leader, but to a business owner, right? I mean, throughout, the
Mhm.
Bible, and the vehicle God chose for families to make positive impact, create value for society, and therefore expand his kingdom, his presence and his principles into the earth is business, right? So families doing business together is like the perfect combo, I believe, in God's ideal plan. So that's our passion now. We've been learning from other multi-generational families who are much further down the road than us. I've been intentionally interviewing and researching financially successful families who have also maintained strong relational connection for 7 or 8 generations. Like so, billionaire families, right? And I've been able to connect with families who literally have 400 to 500 relatives who can't wait to be together for their annual family gathering, and they have like 300 or 400 of those that are family shareholders in their family holding companies, right? I mean, how does that happen? Like 7, 8 generations later, and so it's those kinds of family leaders that my wife and I have been getting to know, learning from, interviewing. And from that and our experience, we're writing a book that will be out just in a couple of months. And it's talking about what we've learned around that. Happy to unpack some principles on that if you want, if we have time. And also developing online courses and workshops that can help other families thrive holistically based on God's plan for creating great abundance in our lives.
Jeff, what follow-up questions do you have in that vein? Thanks for sharing
I-
that.
Just that was a mic drop moment on the switch on the question as far as, I'm assuming you have mission statement and vision core values for your family. Really, really, definitely want to tease that out a little bit. But talk about just as a follow-up, talk more about you have 7 grandkids. I'm sure you're thinking about that third gen. And so that's part one of the question. But part two is, what do you think about in terms of the different types of generosity? When you think about generosity.
Yeah, very good. So I'll start with that second question. I grew up thinking that generosity was primarily about the money we give, right? And I still believe, obviously, that's, a powerful part of that. Over time, I've come to embrace more and more that the deepest generosity is a generosity of heart, where when my heart is fully surrendered to God and his purposes and everything that I do, then everything I do in life and family and business is an expression of generosity. It's an expression of
Hmm.
my heart saying, I am a channel through which God can flow his blessing to the world. In fact, these days I even look at the way we make money in business as an expression of generosity, right?
Hmm.
So that comes from a basic belief that I believe money is in God's economy a certificate of the service, the value that we provide to our fellow human being, right?
Mm,
So it's really, one could say to the degree I'm really serving generously my fellow human being, I'll probably get some of these certificates of service we call money, right? And then when I get that, the question is, what do I do with that? If I see myself as the repository for that, that's not generosity. But if I see myself as the channel to generously flow that through, in my mind now, it's not just about am I flowing it through and giving it away,
mm,
right? But am I being generous? Because sometimes I can create a greater generosity impact by an impact investment, for example, right?
mm, mhm,
Um, that's not necessarily a charitable contribution, right? Or frankly, by sometimes investing that in, now this might sound strange to some, but sometimes investing that in growing some aspect of our business that can further generously bless others with a
mhm,
compounding effect that would be greater in the impact for the kingdom than if I just gave that same amount of money away to a nonprofit, right?
mhm,
And I'm not, so it's not an either or, right? It's a mindset, it's a heart, condition. It's just
mhm,
like, historically when I talk with high net worth families and talk about philanthropy or what we call societal impact or societal capital, their mind immediately goes to just philanthropy, giving it away, right?
mhm,
And even in our estate plan, like that, we had like many, I think, good Christians, that was a significant part of our estate plan for a lot of years, and still is part of it. But these days, we've even revised our estate plan such that there's a part of the financial capital that is specifically dedicated to fostering other kingdom principles in our family and beyond, right? In a way that our family actually guides that in future generations versus a nonprofit that we already gave it away to guiding that in future generations. So anyway, again, when it comes to how you do that, I believe there's not like one best way to do it. It's
mhm,
it's, it's a heart thing, and it's an acknowledgement that the impact we make for God through our generosity is way more than what happens when we give away a dollar. Right?
mhm. Yeah. When I think about what you just talked about there, I think about it really is a mindset, and it's not necessarily how you focus on that generosity. It's more of focused on others versus myself.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
that's really, when you think about generosity, but with your words, your influence, your just everything that you touch, that's kind of where the sea change happens. So talk about Gen 3. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to mention one other thing. It just occurs to me that haven't articulated this before, but because I believe that wealth is defined in five different dimensions,
Hmm.
not just one. Most people, when you hear the word wealth, you think of financial wealth, right? But I believe and you could argue more, but I look through five lenses. We've done this for years. We set goals in these five categories as a family, as individuals, et cetera. And in our business, we define wealth this way. It's one of our core values that defines wealth this way. Anyway, so the first and foremost of those is spiritual wealth, or what we call spiritual capital.
Hmm.
Um, and the question is, how are we developing the spiritual capital of our lives and our family in a very intentional way? And how are we being generous with that capital, right?
Hmm.
Which, because it's more valuable than financial capital, right? So how are we generous with the spiritual capital of life? The second form of capital is relational capital. Like, how are we intentionally developing the relationships in our lives to be rich, deep, God-honoring relationships? And how are we being generous in and with and through those relationships, right? Relational capital is another form of generosity, right? The third is what we call human capital, which is this large bucket that is talking about the cap. In business, we often talk about one of the greatest assets in our business is our human capital, right? It's the people that ultimately everything rises and falls in business based on the quality and effectiveness of the people in the business, right? So it's true in life, it's true in the kingdom, it's true in ministry, it's true in generosity. So question is, how are we developing the human beings in our family to have, first of all, a stewardship mindset and not an ownership mindset, a generous heart and mindset? How are we developing their character, their competencies, as well as their physical health and emotional health, so that, because if I've seen some families where they're very generous with financial capital, but the human beings in the capital are floundering, right?
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
and therefore not able to fully engage in real meaningful generosity, right? So there's human capital, and then there is societal capital, which is the impact of the family on society. I mentioned that earlier. That's the fourth form of family capital. And societal capital, I just talked about, it's how are we impacting society? And I define it through these categories. First, through our giving / philanthropy, right? But then how are we impacting society through our businesses? Number three, through our investments. And number four, through our family itself, right? So those are the four primary ways that I believe God calls our family anyway to impact society. And then finally, last but not necessarily least, if you look at it through God's lens, is financial capital, right? And I believe in God's economy, financial capital exists primarily for the purpose of fostering those non-financial capitals in our families and in our lives and in our world, right? So my view on generosity, it has to do with all five forms of capital.
Mhm. Yeah, and we will put those in the show notes. Really rich, really deep. Just hit on the that Gen 3, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Jeff.
Okay, what would you like to know about Gen 3?
What do you think about? You've obviously put a lot of thought into this and just really rich and spent a lot of time and written and done amazing workshops. What are you thinking about when it comes to Gen 3 for you personally and your 7 grandkids?
Well, first of all, I get big smiles on my face. And, just being I'm Pop Pop and Shelly's Mimi.
Okay.
And it is the most enjoyable, just truly joy-filled role in our lives these days. And
Mhm.
what I think about with them is, how can we create a family culture in our extended family that is the best place on the planet for fostering continual growth in our next generations, our rising generations, in all five of those areas I just talked about,
Mhm.
right? Like
Yeah.
where there's no better group for them to choose to opt into and be a part of and be engaged with that could help them thrive
Mhm.
holistically successful, spiritually, relationally, as human beings, and their impact on the world and financially, right? And therefore being able to live truly abundant, generous lives, abundantly
Mhm.
generous lives, as I like to say it, right?
It's good.
So that's what I think about. And I literally do think about that a lot, and I often, in my quiet time with God, am impressed at how little I'm doing compared with what I could be doing in that. Like I'm still, just last week, I was journaling, and it's like God said, "Wait, you spent way more time the last few days thinking about how to strategically improve your business and your investments than you have been thinking about how to strategically improve your family culture
Mhm.
and grow those five capitals in your own family." It's like,
Mhm.
yes. So I'm not there. I still learning to transition my focus.
Well, Lonnie, one of what we do, as we were talking before we started recording, the company I'm part of, we take people through a five capitals exercise. We call it the full inheritance, and it really opens people's eyes, I think, to these different areas. And one of the questions we always ask, and you kind of referenced it, is if you're going to bankrupt one, which one would it be?
Mhm.
Yeah, I've asked that several times.
It's always the same, by the way, which is the financial one.
Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
one of the things that strikes me as we're all having this conversation is this has so little to do with the money or even the family business. If you're
Mhm.
listening to this and you don't even have a family business, I know it's called the Generous Business Owner Podcast. Both people are involved somehow, but it even if you don't have a business or you don't do it, you've never done a strategic plan at work, it's still relevant to
Mhm.
at least address those capitals and think about how you can be a blessing to the third generation or to the next generation, and so little of it has to do with money. If you're blessed with a lot of resources, that's just a bigger stewardship responsibility, it seems to me. Okay, so you have to figure out what to do with that. But if you're blessed with less, the same principles apply. You think that's fair, Lonnie?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, these principles, it's interesting. I'm kind of embarrassed to admit this, but I actually see high financial net worth families embrace these principles more readily than those that don't have very much financial capital. It's strange, but I think part of it is that if those families that have more financial capital, at least thinking about, is at some point that financial capital is something's going to have to happen to it when I die.
You have to do something with
And
it.
the question is it going to, are we going to give it all away? And if so, is that the best thing? What does that do to future generations? And will that financial capital be a blessing or curse to future generations, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're sometimes thinking more multi-generationally than even those that, ideally every Christ follower would be thinking multi-generationally.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, when my mentor Greg years ago, he the first time he said, so Lonnie, what are you doing today to set up your family for success 100 years from now? It was like, I'd never thought about that before. And again, it's crazy. I think about that in our business, but I hadn't thought about that for my family, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, maybe it crossed my mind, but not like have a plan, a strategy, and take action on it to do something different this week, this month, this year, so that our family will be different, more holistically successful, more fulfilled, more on point, burn brighter and hotter for God and His purposes 100 years from now, right? I hadn't even thought about that before. And it's crazy. Shelley, I'm in a hotel right now, and Shelley and I, the flight last night here, is on Delta, and at the end of the Delta little commercial, when they're telling you what to do, the last thing they said, "Fly with us now and for the next 100 years." And we both looked at each other like, here's a business that's telling this whole plane full of people they have a 100-year vision, right? Right. And how many family members on this plane are even thinking about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and it makes a difference when we do it. It really does. I won't know, obviously, on this planet, whether what I do really makes a difference. But I have seen enough families who have thought this way over the generations and see that what we do today can make a difference 100 years from now.
Yeah. Well, I think to your point, I think you make a good point. When you've accumulated a lot of certificates of service, as you call them, you do have to steward those, and it is a unique tool to steward that you got to think about if you've got been blessed with that big tool. So that's really been great. So,
and if you haven't yet been blessed with a lot of certificates of service. Absolutely. All these principles still apply. It doesn't matter the quantity at all, because this is really not about quantitative capital. It's about the qualitative capitals of our life.
Exactly. Well, that's beautiful. So as we kind of get toward the finish, the question we always like to end with is, this is, you've shared a lot and a lot of really good stuff. Thank you for that. But we always just like to ask for a practical tip for some business owner is listening to this and they're like, wow, how do I get started with all of this? What's some practical tip they could do today or tomorrow to move just in the right direction?
Well, the two topics we talked about in our focus here, I would say the first one would be to just pause long enough to seek God's heart for what is His purpose for you in business. Like, why does He have you in business? If your business didn't exist, what difference would it make for God and His kingdom on this planet? What is God's heart for your business purpose? And it may or may not be reflected in your actual business mission or vision statement. I'm talking deeper than that, right? For you, why does God have you in business? And what's His heart behind that? Second thing is with your family. If you haven't done this yet, practice the same disciplined approach that I imagine most of you business owners have done. Most of you probably already have written values, mission, vision statements for your business, right? 25 years ago, I realized I'd done that for my businesses, but not for the most important multi-generational organization in my world, my family, right? So start there, take some time, and I recommend start with values. And if you're married, you and your spouse first just say, what are the top 5 or 10 non-negotiable principles that we want to guide our family now and in future generations? And you develop those separately, and then what are our personal values, essentially, then come together and compare those lists and see why God brought you together from a values perspective, where your common values are. And then do the same thing with your adult kids, or teenagers and above. Give them some key questions that would help them think thoroughly about what they value most in life. Like questions like, what do you want to be remembered for? Not for what you accomplished, but who you were when you're dead and gone. Or what do you want your kids or grandkids to stand for? What non-negotiable principles do you want to guide your decisions and actions? So have your adult kids or teenagers and above answer those types of questions, come up with their own list of values, and then all of you compare. And from that, you'll come up with a list of shared values as a family to guide your family. You can do the same type of exercise with purpose statement or a vision or mission statement. But write those things down. Don't be like me, decades ago, where I said, well, I don't need that for my family. Just do it.
Yeah, and I think just getting started that way. I love that. What you just unpacked there, I think it can seem very intimidating to people to gather their family to do those things. But if you can make it conversational that way and just get started, and maybe you change it or improve it or whatever over time, but maybe just get something down and start talking about it. I think you're absolutely right. I think you've lowered the bar on how complicated maybe it has to be to get started. So thank you for that.
I love lowering the bar.
I love it. All right. Well, Lonnie, thanks so much for joining us. It's been a real joy to hear your story and learn from you today.
Thank you, Lonnie.
And thanks, Jeff, for joining us. And thank you for everybody listening. Share it with a friend, subscribe, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Generous Business Owner Podcast with Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt. Make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can find the guest contact information in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode.